Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm always glad that I'm a better historian than technician for those kind of things. Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you, Wade, for laying the stage here as to what's going on, what went on at the Battle of Princeton. Now, what I want to talk about today is, do I need to be close to this? What I want to talk to you about today is some of the revelations on the Battle of Princeton, things that are new, things that are not contained in traditional works, secondary sources, or accounts, modern accounts of the Battle of Princeton, developments that came out as a result of the work that we did. Now, wow. And here's a brief outline of what I want to do. I want to explain the battle plan, who is told to go where and to do what. And in this context, we need to talk particularly about Mercer, about Mifflin, and Hausiger. And that's because Mercer and Mifflin are usually on the wrong side, the wrong part of the battlefield, and you're going to have a hard time finding Hausiger mentioned anywhere in traditional accounts. Then, quickly, the battle sequence, and then counterattack and movements toward Nassau Hall. Finally, Hausiger and sequence of events as it stands now. But the focus of what I want to do is here in these first couple points. Real quick, Wade showed you this map already. The Battle of Princeton is part of a 10 days kind of that shook the world here between 1st and 2nd Trenton and Princeton. And as Wade said, Cornwallis down here thinks of fields that he has Washington cornered, and is now going to back him on the 3rd of January, and it turns out that when Cornwallis wakes up on the 3rd of January, Washington is gone. So let's look at briefly the defining features again, since they will come up. Most of you are familiar with this neighborhood. Here's the Quaker Road, which is where we are going to start. The Clark houses here, the barns, the Worth's Mill, Cochran's Hill, the Stony Brook here, William Clark House, the Orchard. We have here Mercer Hill, the Frog Hollow Ravine, since this is where the final phase of this battle begins, and here Nassau Hall in Princeton itself. And down here, of course, the Stony Brook. This is the countryside, the area that we are talking about, that I will be talking about as I'm trying to explain how this battle unfolds here on the 3rd of January of 1777. So let's look at a battle plan. Continental Army, Washington, leaves Trenton or departs Trenton around midnight of the 2nd to 3rd of January 1777. On that moment already some red flags should go up. The whole army does not leave around midnight. To get 5,000, 6,000 people going is like it's going to take you an hour and a half or 2 hours. You have all been in parades, right? Even a Labor Day parade. To get this parade going takes a while, and most parades are not 5 or 6,000 people strong. The other thing that you need to keep in mind is that this is dark, and this is supposed to be done quietly. There's no hollering, "Hey Joe, why don't you get these horses?" or I forgot my musket or something like that, right? All of this is going to take much longer, of course. So if we have accounts that say that having departed Trenton around midnight, the 2nd or 3rd of January 1777, the Continental Army reaches, and I quote, a small wood south of a Quaker meeting on the left of Stony Brook a little before sunrise. This is clearly not the whole Continental Army, because this whole Continental Army of 5,000 men is stretched out probably 2 miles, if not longer. And Wilkinson, who is the one who writes this, talks about himself. Maybe he is in the first elements, but he isn't. There are elements in front of him who get there before him, and there are elements that are going to get to that Stony Brook, to the Stony Brook south of the Quaker meeting after him. This is important as I'm trying to explain how this battle unfolds. The Continental Army is not all lumped together, all 5,000. They're strung out 1.5 miles, probably long, if not longer. Nevertheless, Wilkinson, with whom I want to start, says that if this is a little before sunrise, then this is around 7:15 maybe in the morning, because on the 3rd of January the sun rises at 7:22. And we're about 1.5 miles or so from Princeton. And here Washington does 4 things. He collects his forces, bring them together, fill up the gaps in between. Because you've all been in parades. This is like a harmonica, right? You're standing or running. That's how it goes. So he collects his forces, or at least those that are with him. Yeah, 1 mile, if they're stretched out 1 mile, probably he doesn't know who's where in this point, right? Then he organizes them into tactical units. Some of those units may have had received orders much earlier. He also, as he is gathering here, down here around Quaker Road, designates avenues of approach. He may have done this already for some, but he clearly tells them now where to go, and he assigns them specific tasks for the attack. This is standard procedure in the military, and those of you who had the good fortune of serving in the infantry know how this goes, right? You get your units together, you gather them, you tell them where to go and how to get there. What is happening here is probably the most important component if you want to understand why the Battle of Princeton develops and unfolds the way it does. Because the battle commences shortly thereafter, maybe half hour, not even 45 minutes later. The battle commences shortly thereafter in a completely unforeseen and unplanned way. But the analysis of what happens prior to the first musket shot being fired on this 3rd of January 1777 is unfortunately often overshadowed by the dramatic events on the battlefield. But even if this plan of battle that Washington is outlining here, the avenues of approach, the targets, etc., even if this plan of battle that is transmitted to the soldiers around 7:15, 7:30 is not followed due to events as they approach Princeton, the structure, the organization, the routes, the destinations that are put in place right here in a little after 7 o'clock. The organization of the Continental Army put in place here, the road and routes they are ordered to take, and the tasks that they are assigned to carry out clearly impact the distribution of Washington's forces on the battlefield once fighting has begun. And in this context, And this is one of the things that we found, I think, in this context, it's important to remember that it is possible, if not even likely, that a good third of the Continental Army is already ahead of these forces that rest near the small wood south of the Quaker meeting on the left of Stony Brook, as Wilkinson writes. Before I begin to discuss the structure and its organization, let's take a look at who is involved. Here we have the Continental Army, approximately 5,600 to 5,800 people. As Wade pointed out, this organizational chart gives no idea of the complexity and diversity of the Continental Army outside Princeton. But you do see we have 3 divisions: Sullivan, 12 to 1,400. Then we have Green here, and then we have this group down here, including Mifflin. So we have 12 to 1,400 here. We have Green's division here, and then we have Mifflin here with about 1,500, and the rest is in here. So we have, fairly equal distribution of Continental Army forces here on the battlefield. The Continental Army also has artillery pieces. That is important because, as you know, Captain Neal, for example, is killed next to Mercer, and we have Cadwallader's artillery, we have Proctor and Forrest who are with Mifflin, etc. But it's quite a small artillery detachment that is with the Continental Army, and very few of those guns actually do see action. On the British side, what we have is a considerably smaller force, namely a total of maybe 1,500 forces. The single largest unit in there is the 17th and then the 40th, but these are, to call these regiments is really an overstatement. These are very weak regiments indeed that we have here. By the way, the reason why I got this 42nd Regiment of Foot here in red is the fact that we got these numbers, the fact that 42nd Regiment was there with a company from Mr. Bonk in his, he did this, this year, Trenton and Princeton, but he never provided the primary source background for that. Wade talked about how important it is to use primary sources only. This was a reminder for us to do that. New findings, when we talk about new revelations, they're still coming in, negative as far as having to change our distribution of forces, also positive. This is from the London Evening Post, an account of the death of Captain Williamson, and Wade actually quoted to you an account by a fellow officer in there, and I just happened to put this in, not knowing that Wade was going to quote the same incident. We also keep finding other little items. For example, I found on fold 3 a pay record of the 26th Massachusetts Regiment, for example. Turns out there are about 8 or 9 of the 26th who heed Washington's appeal to stay an extra month or 6 weeks after Trenton, who are there, including a couple African Americans. In other words, if anything, the composition of the Continental Army, particularly the New England troops, becomes more and more complex, and small groups of 6 or 8 or 10 men from different regiments all thrown together. This is something that we tend to forget. For the Continental Army, if Mahood has units that are composed of convalescents, of recruits, of stragglers, men that are commanded by officers whom they met 2 days earlier, like Williamson, for example. Here, he had some business and he just fell in, said, okay, I'll march to Trenton with you, got nothing better to do, you need an officer. The same, of course, is true in the Continental Army, on the Continental Army side as well. We have units that are thrown together, between the 2nd Trenton and Princeton, commanded by officers whom they don't know, surrounded by other soldiers whom they've met 2 or 3 days earlier only. The fact that Washington tries something so difficult as a flanking maneuver with troops that really don't know each other is almost a recipe for disaster. So these are, in other words, what I'm trying to say is we're still finding things, and people send me emails, etc., that to fill out this Continental Army, what it looks like as it approaches Princeton on the 3rd of January 1777. Now, as it approaches Princeton on the 3rd of January 1777, this is where we are, and here we have a distribution of forces, and the distribution of forces that is usually used is the one that's given by James Wilkinson, who is an aide-de-camp to Washington at Princeton, and whose 1816 account is, of the initial phase at least, is the most frequently quoted. Wilkinson writes, the main column wheeled to the right, right, and turning the southeast corner of the wood, marched directly for Princeton. Somewhere around there. General Mercer, accompanied by several volunteers with a detachment consisting of the fragments of Smallwood's regiment, commanded by Captain Stone, the 1st Virginia Regiment by Captain Fleming, and 2 field pieces under Captain Neal, and probably other corps which I do not recollect. He writes in 1816, not 1777. But in the whole, certainly not exceeding 350 men marched immediately up Stony Brook, as I was informed at the time, to take possession of the bridge for the double purpose of intercepting fugitives from Princeton and to cover our rear against Lord Cornwallis from Trenton. In other words, what Wilkinson is saying, has been the standard interpretation of the deployment of Continental Army forces at Princeton, is that the main body of troops marches straight for Princeton, and Mercer, with 350 men and some other forces which he doesn't recollect, go up here to the bridge with orders to tear down the bridge and to cover our rear against Lord Cornwallis. Wilkinson does not identify any column other than the one he was in, and as I said, makes it appear as if Mercer is going up there to Worth's Mill and tear down the bridge. If you know where Mercer was killed, right, and where Neal was killed, you begin to wonder how that's possible. Right? Because if they march here with artillery pieces, somewhere around here they will probably hear the fire. I would not want to pull artillery pieces up the steep ravine there. And he gets killed, over here somewhere, right? Yeah. Neal as well as Mercer. There you would say, well, wait a minute, this is going to be a difficult maneuver, to say the least, to get up here. The same goes for Neal with the artillery. Where do they, keep in mind, where do they end up on the battlefield? Where are they killed? Nevertheless, this is the standard distribution of forces that you see, and it's a very narrow distribution of forces and description of who is there, because very few units are actually mentioned. Fortunately, we have Captain Thomas Rodney and others who write that when we had proceeded to within 1.5 miles of Princeton and the van had crossed Stony Brook, General Washington ordered our infantry to file off to one side of the road and halt. Okay, there's no problem here with what Rodney is describing. But what Rodney is then describing, and there are others who are doing this too, he's not the only one, I'm just quoting Rodney here, that General Sullivan was ordered to wheel to the right and flank the town on that side. No problem. This is this first division that I showed you earlier with Brigadier General St. Clair's brigade, the remnants of 12 or 15 New England regiment, about 12 to 1,400 men strong. And eyewitness accounts and pension records show that for the attack on Princeton, this division is reinforced with Colonel Stevenson's Virginia Brigade, Daniel Hitchcock's New England Brigade, Colonel Hand's Pennsylvania Riflemen, etc. This lead division, in other words, that's turning off here toward Princeton is about 2,200 men strong. It's about 40% of the Continental Army. And this arrangement makes perfect sense from a tactical point of view, because these are Washington's best troops. These are the remnants of experienced line units who are tasked to deliver the first blow to ground forces in Princeton. Next Rodney and some others say that 2 brigades were ordered to wheel to the left to make a circuit and surround the town on that side, and as they went to break down the bridge and post a party at the mill on the main road. That's something totally different, because what a couple of officers, and including a sergeant, is writing is that two brigades are ordered to march here. One of them, right, is supposed to stay behind. A party is supposed to stay at the mill on the main road and break down the bridge. But what is the other party supposed to do? That other party is supposed to make a circuit, surround the town on the other side. This is this typical surrounding hammer and anvil approach that Washington had tried with mixed success, to say the least, before. In order for this to work, 2 things have to happen, and two criteria have to be met. The first criterion is that if this attack column of about 2,200 men is supposed to be the hammer in this attack, the other force that's supposed to play the anvil has to be just as strong, if possible. And the other thing that you need to keep in mind is for these forces to make it to the rear of Princeton, and this is hilly here, right? They have to get a head start, at least an hour, if possible. And this is where this taking off from Trenton, stretching out, taking an hour and a half to get this whole army going, this time gap becomes important, because these forces, in order to get to the other side of Princeton, cannot set off at the same time as these forces here. They must have set off earlier. This second division that Rodney and others are talking about are Fermoy's and Mifflin's brigades. Fermoy, but these are also the 2 divisions, of course, that either do not show up in the histories of the battle at all, because where's Fermoy, if you read accounts of the battle? Where's Houseker? They just never show up, because everything focuses on this Scottish hothead Mercer here, who is determined to get killed, right? But there are other things going on around here that are very easily forgotten. But if we keep, for example, Rodney in mind, we see that not only does this task here from a tactical point of view make sense and considering the goals and purposes of the march on Princeton, but that when we look at the strength of these two brigades, about 2,000 troops, then Fermoy's brigade is almost as large as Washington's attack division, which we said is about 2,200 men. These divisions, which are created in probably at Trenton already, as they set off, because these troops that are supposed to go around Princeton have to be the first to leave Trenton in order to do their job. This Fermoy's brigade here consists of is a strike force, then consists of the German regiment under Colonel Nicholas Hausager and the 3rd Battalion of Philadelphia Associators. And those units have what in common that's incredibly important on the battlefield? They all speak the same language. You want to get the Germans out from the New England troops. And so what Washington is doing, he's not only taking what is probably the largest intact unit in the Continental Army, which is the German regiment, which speaks German, and throws German-speaking or some German speakers from the Pennsylvania, from the Associators in there with it, and creates and has a force that actually has coherence, speaks the same language, knows their colonel. That this doesn't work out eventually is has a number of reasons. One of them is that it's simply too ambitious. If they had had cell phones, it would have been easier to organize movements here. And the other is, of course, that there are things happening here with Mercer and Mahout being out there that throw this whole battle plan out the window, of course. However, now we have about 2,200 under Washington accounted for. We have the German battalion and the 3rd Battalion of German Regiment, the 3rd Battalion of the Pennsylvania Associators accounted for. That makes about 4,200, and we need another 1,500 men. And those 1,500 men are Mifflin's forces. And these are these forces who are under Mifflin, who are supposed to go up here to Worth Mill. If Cornwallis actually comes up here, with 350 men here, if there are 350 Continentals here, Cornwallis is going to send out his provost guard and arrest them. You have to have a large force here to come even close to trying to slow down Cornwallis's approach. But if you look at this, and as I said in our report, there are others who explain who have exactly the same outline and distribution of forces before the battle breaks out. Now you have all units accounted for. They all have clearly assigned tasks. They all have clearly assigned access routes where they're supposed to be going. And what you also have done, of course, is you redistributed the forces on the battlefield in a very different way from how it is traditionally done, including in Dr. Hackett Fisher's the 10 days. And Dr. Fisher was one of the outside readers of our report, and he signed off on it and said, yeah, this makes perfectly more sense. And I have the highest respect for his work, by the way. His book is wonderful if you've read it. This was the first kind of revelation, the first new finding, I think, that comes out of the report, that we did. William McCracken, who served with Captain Thomas Strawbridge's company of the Chester County Militia and Mifflin's brigade, writes that he belonged to General Mifflin's brigade, that he went with his company across the country to Princeton, and as they marched on, heard the firing of the competing armies and was ordered to break down a bridge, which they in part cut down and set fire to repose of it when the British fired field pieces from an adjoining hill. They went then from thence to Princeton and followed the army. He says, we heard the firing of the battle. Which makes perfect sense, because if you're down here, you can't see what's going on up there. You got these old ravines up there. That's all they can do. And this is just one of the number of troopers in Mifflin's, the brigade, who say the same thing. One of them actually says, we did, but I'll get to this, in a minute. The other, let me just quote to you another account that's important in this context, and that is the account by a Mr. Hood, who serves with the 3rd Pennsylvania, with the Pennsylvania Associators here. Mr. Hood is in his relation of the engagement at Trenton and Princeton on Thursday and Friday, 2nd and 3rd of January, writes that about 12 o'clock at night, and he talks about 2nd or 3rd of January, we were ordered on the arms. A little after 1, ordered to arms again. They united the several brigades together, and the artillery advanced before them, and the army followed. They continued their march around the head of the Mill Creek Dam, passed the bridge, and so continued their route to the Princetown Road, and then crossed it. And they're down here, Mill Creek, Princetown Road, which is the old road. They crossed it, he says, and passed into a by road and proceeded about 1 mile to the northward of Princeton. 1 mile to the northward of Princeton, he says, and continued this road till daylight, when they saw Princeton. In other words, they were way up there already, right, until daylight, which is about 7:30 when they see Princeton. In other words, they have to have a head start in order to do this. And here's one explanation for this. It's interesting, by the way, that Mr. Stryker, and those of you who have worked on the Battle of Princeton know Stryker's books, right, identifies, since he didn't know what to do with this account, and he says this is a ground forces soldier. He makes a British soldier out of him simply because he couldn't fit it anywhere into the battle sequence, because everybody had been trusting what Wilkinson said, what happened actually. Yeah. Now I think it makes perfect sense, because there's no reason why ground forces should be somewhere up there. So Rodney, if we go back to Rodney then real quick, the 3rd Division was composed of General Mercer's brigade of Continental troops, about 350 men, and Cadwallader's brigade of Philadelphia militia, to which brigade the whole of our light infantry regiment was annexed. And we already heard that the whole of this whole light infantry regiment was, about a dozen men, somewhere around there. Mercer's brigade marched in front, and another corps of infantry brought up the rear. That too is important to remember. Rodney and Mr. Hood and others say the same thing, that Mercer's in the middle. Here is Sullivan, the attack division. These are Washington's best troops. Here is Hausiger, etc., the German regiment, another 2,000 men. And who comes here? Mercer, and with about 300, 350 men, all thrown together, and a bunch of militia. And if you remember who takes and has to suffer the full blow of the 17th Regiment, these are not Washington's best troops, rather they are his weakest troops. Those are the militia. These are a couple hundred Continentals led by a hothead who says, let's go get them, right? And who also then, and all of this ties together, of course, if you read these various eyewitness accounts that we have, you have accounts that say Cadwallader coming after him with the Philadelphia militia, Pennsylvania militia, just tells his forces to go help Mercer without forming them. If you read the accounts of the counterattack, they all will say, once we got through the wood, we lined up, we formed, and then we attacked. Apparently, the Pennsylvania militia came out of the woods here, storming out there without being formed, without being structured, without being ordered. And we all know, of course, what happened. They are thrown back until Washington comes and puts them in some kind of order, who goes where, when, and then things, of course, work out. It is important to remember that as this battle unfolds, it is the weakest link in this forces approaching Princeton that get attacked, and the fact that the battle is still won, I think is primarily because of numbers. If Mahout had another 400 or 500, this would have turned out probably, not just probably, this would have turned out a very different way. But let me recapitulate quickly this first part of what I was trying to say. The first revelation, the first new thing I think that came out of this study is that now for the first time we have all units accounted for. We have 3 approach routes, we have 3 destinations, we have 3 tasks. And if you look at it this way, then you see, and who is in which unit, you see why this is so critical down here, because, as I said, Mahout hits the weakest link in this whole, in the Continental Army, as it is approaching Princeton now. Okay. As they are approaching Princeton now, in this outline, we know from different accounts here that if you look at the distance from the first sighting, we know that the mounted dragoons up here, up on the hill, a scouting party, and I have a pretty good idea why we have a scouting party fairly strong up there at this point. Loud? Of course. Hausiger has crossed here maybe half hour earlier. There is no way that the people running ahead here cannot notice that 2,000 people have trudged across here. They say, what is going on? And that's when you get dragoons up here looking back. Keep this in mind. They're up here, and then they see forces here somewhere. What does Mahout do? Mahout sends a cornet down there to find out who this is, because Mahout thinks, there's probably Hessians. They got lost. These people, right? The damn foreigners. We get a cornet checking. He comes back, says, no, I think those Americans, they got dirty uniforms, what have you. Mahout says, no, go back, I don't believe this. He comes closer, checks again, comes back and says, well, these are really Americans. At that point, Mercer has also seen this horseman there and sends somebody up to talk to Washington up there, say there's horsemen back here. Probably at the same time as somebody in Sullivan's column here tells Washington, hey, there's horsemen back there, and then there comes the messenger from Mercer. And what does Washington do? And here we again see the difference in the development of these armies. Mercer requested the permission to commence the attack, and Washington says, yeah, go ahead, do that. It's probably just a scouting party. We go on to Princeton. Remember what Mahout had done when there were people in his flank that he didn't know who they were? He sent people there 2-3 times to figure out who they are. Washington says, this is just a scouting party, go get them. Let's not get distracted, right? If it hadn't been Washington, it would have ended in a court-martial later on, right? We all know what happened, of course. Mercer, says, oh, great, let's do that. He tries to intercept. He tries to intercept Crown forces there. Here's the sunrise again, when he gives orders to fire at this Lieutenant Wilmot, this horseman, who is within rifle range, which means it's within 300 yards or so. Here's our Sergeant R from Coventry, Connecticut. Actually, his grave is up there in Coventry if you want to go see it. When he says, well, they were looking at us as if we were looking into the sun. So in other words, he has to be up here on a height. The horseman goes back, and Mercer marches toward the road, trying to intercept the forces on here, forces which he thinks, of course, is just a little scouting party that's out there. And while Mahood, of course, comes back, deploys his forces up here on this ridge, and then behind the orchard, Mercer runs into them and gets himself killed in the process as we go through this, right? Washington is with Sullivan is moving up here. Here's Cadwallader, and here's Mifflin on his way to the sawmill, and Housing is probably up here somewhere already. Mahood displays and deploys his forces exactly the way he's supposed to. And keep in mind the image that you saw with the distribution of artifacts. Of course, it's the same kind of half-moon shaped distribution of artifacts. Mercer attacks, gets fire, is pushed back. Here's Neil with the artillery. Here's the Clark House. Cadwallader comes up in a hurry, as some eyewitnesses say, just tells his men to keep on running. Even Peel, the painter who is in there, right, said I didn't feel very good about this, what we were doing here. For one thing, you come out here and there's a whole bunch of people and there's British artillery up there. You couldn't wish for a better target, of course. Lump them all together. Is pushed back. By the way, if you look at the again, try to keep that map in mind with the grape shot distribution. That's right down here. These are British artillery firing at them, and I forget who it is, says they didn't do a lot of damage because they're being up on a hill. They overshot us, which is normal, shooting downhill. But you find a lot of artillery down here, which has to be British, because there's no Continental Army firing down here with artillery pieces. They're pushed back here. Mercer gets killed. Cadwallader is also pushed back. This is when Washington comes riding back and tries to put some order into this herd of cats that's down there. And now comes the counterattack. What has happened now, of course, is that Mifflin's men have heard the firing, and while some continue up here toward the bridge, many of them come up, and you see how the right flank of ground forces here is under attack, which is why they move farther and farther in. With Washington's leadership and the Pennsylvania militia finally, getting a little courage here, you get 1,500, 1,800 men here. And remember how few Mahood has. But what turns the tide is then Continental Army forces up here. the forces that are in the rear of Sullivans Division, Hand and Hitchcock, etc., who are coming from this side. And now Crown forces are in real danger of being encircled, and the battle is decided. The battle is decided with what percentage of the Continental Army being actually engaged? Not even half. Not even half. Because Hausiger is up here with over 2,000. He's Sullivan's division with well over 1,000, still up there, right? And here we got Mifflin, a couple of hundred who are here. This is less than half of the Continental Army that is involved here. And again, if Mahood had a couple of hundred more, these 2,000, if there had been 2,000 Continentals against 2,000 Crown forces, the battle would have ended very differently. Because these forces up here, they know what's going on. Because there's Beale, there are others who are up there who can see. They can see what's going on here from Mercer Heights, etc. Remember, this picture, this sketch that Trumbull had drawn, there are no trees here anywhere in 1777, and it's winter, though there's no leaves on the trees either. In 1781, when French forces marched through this area, there's Verger, for example, who says and they had all heard of the Battle of Princeton, of course. And there's Verger who says that up here from the college, from Nassau Hall, you could see all the way down the battlefield. There's not a single tree anywhere. So the people who are up here, Beale, the Virginians, etc., in Sullivan's division, they can see what's going on here, but they can't move. They cannot move because there are Crown forces here, so they can't really come down here to help, and they can't move into Princeton either, because if they move into Princeton, then the 55th here closes off, and then who knows what's left in Princeton in there. So they keep looking at each other, and not only do they keep looking at each other, who's of course also watching this is our Mr. Hood, who is with the 3rd Pennsylvania Associators up there with Hausiger's regiment. He says a firing began by the Virginia Brigade, and then it was supported by General Cadwallader's brigade, which was at first put in a little confusion, talk about spin, but rallied under the hill immediately. Under the hill. In other words, they go back here toward the Stony Brook, where we also saw these grape shot, and here protected by this little ridge. This is where they reform. And in the meantime, a New England brigade advanced, and the riflemen flanked the enemy and then broke and ran immediately, upon which our people pursued them, advanced to the town. They fired one shot into the college when a man waved his hat. Another shot was fired and the flag was sent out and they surrendered. In other words, he is clearly watching what's going on. He sees exactly what's happening here. But he can't do anything. They can't do anything up there either. All they can do is watch. General Mercer advanced, and this is still Hood speaking, General Mercer advanced at the head of his brigade between a barn and a house near where the engagement began. We know what the barn and the house is, and he sees that. His horse was shot under him and fell. When the general was recovering from the fall, the enemy thrust a bayonet in his head. It is said he died of his wounds, and Captain Shippen shot through the head. This party, etc., etc. So in other words, he's watching, and then he goes on, then we go into Princeton. But the way he describes how he goes into Princeton clearly shows that they come from the north into Princeton. The Battle of Princeton is one of these strange events, strange battles, where less than half of an army is involved. It's actually the weakest spots of an army that are involved, and wins anyway, but it's primarily because of numbers and leadership. Because in Washington, and there's a number of accounts where it says that in the smoke, in the white smoke there, Washington, Apollo Morris, for example, others are afraid that Washington is dead, but he comes like Phoenix out of the ashes. He is still there from the back of the town because as Hood, and there's one last quote to drive home this point if it were necessary. This Mr. Whittier from the 3rd Pennsylvania says, "We came through the woods and field on the back of the town, and perceived the enemy about 700 on the rise of a hill," right here, on the rise of a hill, to be about 1 mile, about 3/4 of a mile from the town. For him to be on the back of the town and see an enemy that's about 3/4 of a mile from the town on a hill, that enemy has to be on the other side of Princeton, because otherwise this enemy is less than a 1/4 mile from them, and there are no ground forces up there, obviously, right? So these are, these I think, then to look at this last slide one more time of the counterattack, shows you where this half-round circle here of how we in our study here arranged Continental Army forces and ground forces, which is an arrangement that is supported by the distribution of artifacts in here, and I'm sure there are more over here, but as Wade said, no research had been done in this. So here's this map again. With the battle over, as I said, now once the tide has turned down here on the battlefield, now there's Bill saying, there are 250 redcoats over there, there's 250 of us, let's go get them, and they run across the ravine, but by the time they get there, they have fled already. By the time they get to Nassau Hall, they surrender very quickly, and the battle is over. Let me recapitulate real quick. It says new findings or revelations on the Battle of Princeton. I think our report, and you don't have to agree with it, our report, I think, has done 3 things. First of all, I think we finally have the Continental Army accounted for. They have a place on the battlefield, they have a task, they have a route. Secondly, we have, I think, redrawn the map of the battle, because it now goes well north of Princeton, actually. It goes on the other side of the Trenton-Princeton Road, because we got Hausiger involved here as well. And that makes for a much larger battlefield. And I think the third point that we made, or we're trying to make in our study, is that it is a battle that could have gone just as easily the other way, and fortunately it did not. And we brought a number of reasons for that, having to do with inexperience on the part of the leadership, as well as inexperience on the part of the soldiery, having to do with a clash of cultures almost, or a certain clash of military cultures in there. And it is interesting to note that if we here in the United States herald the Battle of Princeton as a great success and one of the turning points of the American War of Independence, etc., the 17th Regiment in particular in Britain also sees the Battle of Princeton as a victory, as one of the greatest feats of arms that this regiment ever carried out, because if you remember back, the regiment is barely, not even 300 men strong, facing, even if it's just a third of Washington's army, nevertheless overwhelming odds, and come this close to winning. Thank you very much.